So today I'm making up my Bolognese. Part of the reason I'm making it is because I love Bolognese. Part of the reason that I'm making it is because I have a very large amount of zucchini, carrots left over from my carrot harvest that I need to use, celery that's growing really well in the garden, just lots of things that are gonna fit really well into a Bolognese. So I'm gonna show you kind of what I do and what my process is. And I will tell you I have some really big pots. And that is actually a recommendation if you're gonna do a large amount of cooking. Starting to get noisy. If you're gonna do a large amount of cooking, you want some really big pots. So here we go. I have in this big pot over here is, in here I've got some onions. And actually let me show you that. Also love these gloves. So this is all about how to cook garden veggies. So I'll show you what's in here. I've got an olive oil in there and just some onions. I'm cooking this down until they get kind of translucent. I do puree my onions. That's just the way I like to cook onions. You can also just chop them small, but I just stick them in like a blender and puree them. So that's that. So what I have here is actually some carrots from my garden, a poblano pepper. I like to put peppers, at least a few, in my Bolognese. There's some pureed celery. It didn't chop up correctly in my blender, so I ended up pureeing it. I didn't want it to be big chunks of weird celery bit. And then this is actually, I pureed this as well. These are cherry tomatoes from my garden last year. I'm gonna use this as part of my tomato sauce that I add to the, they were in my freezer over winter, and this was a great use for them, the cherry tomatoes. All right, so this is the main driver for wanting to do this project. It's all this zucchini. I have 2 large zucchinis in here. I don't even think I took a picture of them before I shredded them yesterday. I shredded them in my Ninja blender. And 2 yellow squash, those yellow crookneck squash. And they're pretty big when I pulled them off. So what I'm doing here is just cooking these down. And this is gonna take a while. I've got this on medium-high to high heat. And I'm just gonna cook these down until they're translucent and cooked. So we'll do that. One of the hardest things I think about gardening is actually figuring out what to do with all of your produce. And for me, it's important to have 1 or 2 recipes that use a lot of garden produce. In Bolognese, I promise you this was invented because it's so easy to grow stuff in Italy, especially all these things. So I've got carrots here, and I've got purple and orange carrots. And then over here, I have some celery, which I did puree, so it's a little bit of a mush. Put that in. I'm just gonna give it a good stir here. And you'll notice, I don't know how well you can see it, you'll notice it's actually pretty dry. There's not a lot of liquid here. Just give it a minute. It's gonna get a lot wetter. The heat is gonna start extracting the liquids from this really quickly. Showing you the liquid extraction. Showing you the liquid extraction here. There's a growing amount of liquid at the bottom. You do want to keep moving it because you don't want, oops, try not to make a mess. You don't want to burn anything, especially on the sides. Browning is not a bad thing. You just don't want things to get black. As long as they're brown, that's actually developing flavor and it's not a bad thing. So to all this, to 2 very large zucchini and 2 kind of reasonably sized yellow squash, which I pureed. I'm going to add maybe 1.25 pounds of meat. So this is a very veggie heavy sauce. You could probably do 2 pounds. But actually last night I learned a lot about bulk cooking. And last night I browned up some meat for tacos. And I had another squash, so many squash. I did another squash and I actually I'd done 2 pounds of meat and I saved about 1.25 pounds of the meat for this meal. So just trying to save myself a little time and a little cooking energy. So see how this is already, if you look closely, see how it's already starting to break down. We really want this to break down. This is literally going to be part of the sauce. I might go out and see if there's another squash I can pick today, because I like to cube some of my squash and put that in for a little bit of bulk and texture. I think squash is a nice, oh, I've actually got a patty pan squash. I'll probably cut that up and put that in as chunks, and I'll just have that in the main cooking period, but this is cooking down nicely. So the reason I have two pots here, one with the zucchini and one with the carrots, is because I'm just trying to be efficient with my time. It can take hours and hours to cook a bolognese. This is kind of my hack to cook it quicker. I put all the zucchini in one, the surface area of your pan. These are both 10-inch pans. I think they're 10-inch. Measuring tape. Just kidding, these are 12-inch pans. This one too, I think. Yeah, so these are 12-inch pans. And what I'm doing here by separating them into two different buckets is I am trying to cook much more quickly without sacrificing the flavor. So if I were to cook all of this in this pot, it would probably take about twice as long. This way I'm cutting the time, my time, in half. Not necessarily the energy use or anything, because the this pan is they're both heating on gas right now, which is actually quite warm, really warm in here. All right, I'm gonna move you guys over so you can see what I'm doing, and you'll also see a couple of other things that I'm gonna do. I'm gonna use the two pans kind of to my advantage. There's a couple of other things that I want to cook down over here. So once I move things, I'm gonna kind of prep things over here and then move them into the big pot as I go along. One of the things that is a little different about this cooking for me is I had these beautiful cherry tomatoes from last year's garden that I pureed, and I want to cook them down a little. There's a lot of water in here. I usually use a tomato sauce or a tomato paste, which is a much more cooked down version. It's going to taste fantastic having fresh tomatoes in there, but it is a little bit more more juice in there, or more water in there, and so I want to cook a little bit of that out. So as soon as these two cook down a little bit more, I'm going to then put this in here. Here, I'll show you. I'm going to then put this in here, and then I'll cook the tomatoes in here. All right, I think that's a little bit better angle. So I'm then going to put this in here, and I'm going to cook both down. I think this guy's got a lot more ways to go than that one, but cooking things down, because there's so much water in here, you're not going to get a lot of browning, which is fine. I've got good browning on the meat, and I'm going to let this cook down a little further, and this one as well. Another thing that I'm going to put in this one over here actually is garlic. I'm going to brown, or not brown, but just lightly saute some garlic. Don't have, well, I actually could get garlic out of my garden. Maybe I'll go do that. So I turned both of my stoves off, and we're actually going to go and collect a few things for the garden for this bolognese. All right, I just pulled this guy off. It is very small, but I don't think it's going to get any bigger. I don't think it actually got pollinated. It was about this big when it was theoretically fertilized. And you'll see like this one back here was fertilized after it. That one, and it's already much bigger. Just looking at the size there. And this one, I'm pretty sure got fertilized. They will jump up in size as soon as they are officially fertilized. So this guy, I don't think it's going to get any bigger, and I think it'll taste just fine. Somewhat similar story over here. This guy has not gotten bigger in a full day. And I think that just means this is the size it's going to be. And so I'm going to go ahead and pull it for this meal because I have a way to use it right now, and I don't think it's going to get any bigger. So just twisting it off. All right, something else I'm going to harvest for this meal is this patty pan squash. It's a good size. It's bigger than it was yesterday, and I think it's an appropriate size for this meal. So I'm going to harvest this guy. That was really easy to pull off, kind of nice. So just a little squash harvest to add to the rest of my pot there. But I just want to see actually how this garlic is doing. So I'm going to pick one of the ones that looks a little bigger. And it's not really bulbing yet. So I actually think I'm going to leave it. Sometimes this is forgotten, oftentimes it's not. But one of the best things about gardening is having all of these herbs to just come out here and grab. I've got lots of peppers, but I'm not going to pull any more peppers. I just found a bag of peppers in my freezer. Oh, there's some flowers on there. You can cook the flowers, but I'm just going to pinch them off. I'm actually going to pinch off the whole section that had the flowers on it, because that is the plant starting to bolt. All of this I'm going to chop up and put in the dish that I'm doing today. What else do we want? We got beautiful basil. That's a tomato mess from this morning. Need to pick that up. Oh, absolutely some chives. So I'm just going to go in here at the base, pull up some chives. For this, what I'm doing, I'm going to come and grab some, this is thyme. This has been growing here for maybe 2 years. I had one that had lasted, that's probably enough for the whole dish. These are garlic chives. They're really tasty. Let's see what else. Oregano, yes, definitely. And it doesn't affect the flavor that it's blooming, so don't worry about that. To the garden. So I've got oregano, basil, thyme, garlic chives, regular chives. I think that's pretty much everything. One more. All right, so this is rosemary. All right, I have the stovetop back on, and I'm going to just walk you through our little mini harvest here. So this got a zucchini that wasn't going to get any bigger because it wasn't fertilized. We'll see how it looks on the inside, whether we're going to keep it. This is similar. I think this one maybe was partially fertilized, but it wasn't bigger in one day, and these guys will explode in growth in a day, and so I could tell this wasn't going to get any bigger. I'm going to rinse those off because they've got a little dirt on them. And then I've got some herbs over here. I have, let's see if I can separate these out. So these, and the way you can tell the difference between garlic chives and onion chives is the garlic chives, at least in my case, are flat, versus the onion chives are round. So pretty straightforward there. And then we have some rosemary, thyme. Thyme comes in a couple of different forms, but usually it's these little tiny leaves. Oregano, you'll see this in a couple different forms usually. And of course, basil. So I grabbed a good chunk of basil, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to chop all of this up to put in the dish. zucchini is starting to actually brown on the bottom of the pan, which is good, but we don't want it to get black. So it's kind of a darker brown right now. You see a little bit, it's a little on the side here. It's brown, it's not black. So it's okay, it's just adding a depth of flavor. If it gets black, it starts to taste burnt, but as long as it's still brown, we're actually adding a really nice element of flavor to the dish. So this one, again, getting a little brown there. And what I'm gonna do, as long as it's brown, we're still good, we're not burnt. Adding a little water to this one. It's brown over here. And we don't want it to get black. As long as it's still brown, grabbing a little more water. As long as it's still brown, we're good. And actually, even though we're cooking out the water in these, adding a little water back can help them cook more quickly, because I don't actually know exactly how it works, but my understanding is heat flows better through, I think it flows the best through gas, so steaming things is the fastest way to cook them. And then it flows second best through water, and then if it's just like one section of this touching, one, it's gonna eventually burn, and two, it's not gonna cook as quickly. And one of my goals here is really to save some time. So you can still tell there's carrot, shreds in here. The eventual goal is for this all to cook into one, not perfectly smooth sauce. I'm not going to be a slightly chunky sauce, but not super chunky. I'm not going to like use an emulsion blender and puree this all down to a fine mush. My goal is actually have a little bit of texture to the sauce here. All right, it might be time to combine these two. So I'm going to combine this one with this one. I'm probably going to put it on medium heat just because I'm trying to kind of slow roast these tomatoes. And they still had the seeds and the shells and everything in them. There's no way I was going to de-seed and de-shell cherry tomatoes. It would have taken forever. First time. So this is interesting actually. So thyme, I don't try to go and pull off all the leaves and everything. This one, and actually the rosemary as well, what I've always done, I think I saw this in a recipe once many years ago. Take the really woody bit off there. And the oregano I'll probably chop up just because the leaves are big. I take some kitchen string or some twine. You want to make sure it doesn't have any chemicals on it, but you just take the bundle of herbs, tie it up. This is partly so you don't have to get all the little bits off. It'll literally just all the little tiny leaves and stuff will come off into your food. I mean, if you want to chop these down, you can, but they'll cook down pretty good. And then you can just fish out the whole bundle. And it's a nice way to save a little time, and it works great. All right, so a couple of years ago, I watched a video, maybe it was a year ago, I don't remember. I watched a video sometime during the pandemic. That was what, 6 months ago? I'm just kidding. It's been a while. But one of the things I watched a video on was somebody did a taste test of all the different kinds of tomato brand. I love this. This is Ciento. It's an Italian brand. It's a little bit more expensive, but overall, you know, we're making our food from home and our own garden, and so it is nice to get the higher quality stuff if you can find it in your area and if you can afford it. It can be nice to have, but I did do some research, and this is just, I live in Texas, so HEB is the brand here. Is the brand that I love here, actually. It's really the right way to say it. They're great quality stuff, and I now understand the difference between these two, kind of. This is probably higher quality tomatoes, etc. But one of the things that the guy that did the video said was the biggest taste difference was actually in what was added to the item. So for like petite dice or crushed or anything like that, I try to go for the nicer brand. But for puree, he said there was really no taste difference between the store brand and the high-end brand for things that didn't have the additives. So apparently, to keep the texture of the petite or the crushed or whatever, they have to put additives in, and the nicer brands put in better additives. But for puree, because they're not trying to keep the structure of the tomato, if you actually look at the ingredients, and I don't know if this is going to show up, it's going to be able to see it on here or not, but the ingredients are just tomato pulp. That's it. So that's all that's in here. There's no additives, and so the taste difference isn't very big between this and the expensive brand. So when I buy purees, when I buy pastes, anything that doesn't have structure to the tomato, I tend to buy just the store brand, and especially HEB. I know they have good quality. And when I'm buying something that has a little texture to it, then I'm buying the higher end brand, you know, if at the time I can afford it. So just some food for thought there. One of these right now. Feels like a lot of water. I'm actually going to turn up the heat here. I was going to show you one of my favorite things I own in my kitchen. I don't remember how much these were. We got them as a wedding present. They were on our wish list, and somebody got them for us, or maybe multiple people. These are the coolest things. They store really well because there's lots of them together. And there's just, let's see, I've got 4 of them, 2 of the really little ones, 4 of these. That's about the right number. And these are the most useful ones. Because you're doing herbs or something like this, you just put it in its own pretty little bowl, and you feel like a pro chef. So you got a birthday coming up or something. It's a fun little kitchen thing. Anyway, that's my beautiful additions to the Bolognese. Almost too pretty to put in, right? We are well on our way to cooking down a beautiful Bolognese. We forgot something. One of the things, and I don't actually know what Bolognese means. Alexa, what does Bolognese mean? Okay, so Bolognese, according to my computer device there, is browned meat, tomatoes, onions, and herbs. And then anything else you want to add. If you notice, my Bolognese is not just browned meat, tomatoes, and onions. There's a ton of carrots, a ton of zucchini. There's a lot of other flavor elements in there. I've even put a little bit of peppers. Okay, I think I'm gonna put more peppers actually. I did it a couple years ago and it tasted really good, and I just found some in my freezer. I'm gonna go get these out. Here's my bag of frozen peppers from last year. These I think were store-bought. A lot of these I think I had to pick early for some reason. They're all green still. Maybe the plant was dying, I'm not sure. I'm gonna do a few green, the rest of those orange, and a few of the yellow. So peppers, if you're ever trying to preserve, peppers freeze beautifully. Highly, highly recommend. You just throw them in a freezer bag. These I froze September probably last year. It's May now. They're doing great. So best way to preserve peppers, I think, freeze them. And they're super easy to use. Plus they're already mostly pre-chopped. I de-seeded them all. I did kind of a pepper chopping day. Next step in the process, we're using the same pan. It's part of the reason I like having two pans, because I can brown a few things or get some things going. Now, I already browned my meat, but right here I'm going to add, that's garlic. It looks more like an elephant garlic, so I think it's a milder flavor, plus, okay, we like garlic in this family. Spread that out a little. I'm gonna get that toasting there. Next thing we're gonna add, see why I love these little bowls, they're so cute. Next thing we're gonna add are these peppers. I like to cook down my peppers, kind of like I like to cook down my onions. We're adding the mushrooms. They're all finely chopped. I just found these in my fridge, and making a Bolognese is a great way to use up lots of things. So they had these in my fridge. They're about to go bad, so here we go. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to add actually is this meat. First I'm going to put it, it's cooled from the fridge. This was actually already pre-cooked. So we're skipping that step. This is probably about 1.25 pounds, maybe 1.5 pounds of meat. I'm going to pour that in here. already cooked. So you do want this brown. You want to get that nice brown color. Not just isn't turning brown, but that little bit of, don't know how to describe it, but basically that not quite burnt brown on there. Mix that in. And then we're gonna add this. This is our squash. All right, now I'm just letting it cook down for, I think it was about 2 hours. You can do a little bit longer, a little bit less long, depending on how you like the flavor. I usually add a little water over time just to make sure that there's plenty to boil off to add to that depth of flavor. I'll close the lid and put a little bit of gap there. I just forgotten to add some herbs, so I'm throwing those in real quick. There's some bay leaves, some basil. I like to put a lot of basil in. A little bit of salt. It's probably about a teaspoon and a half. Pepper. That's also probably about a teaspoon. It was actually more than I intended to put in there, but it ended up tasting great, so. And then I kind of looked at it and thought, that's probably more on the veggie and probably needs a little more tomato sauce. And so I added another can of tomato sauce. Part of that just stretches it a little bit further and also just using up the things that were in my pantry. So I cooked this down probably for another hour or two. Ended up putting on the lid for a little bit and just letting it, just kind of stirring every few minutes and letting it cook down. But this is the flavor part, so don't skip it. All right, you're going to see the difference here as it cooks down. It's pretty watery, and then the final product is going to be pretty thick. And this tasted amazing. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Hope you have a wonderful day. Hope you learned something, and hope you now have a great way to use all those wonderful veggies in your garden. Thanks. Bye.